Hi guys, so I am going to read you the first chapter from one of my favourite Roald Dahl books, Matilda. So hopefully this might inspire some of you to read. So, chapter 1, The Reader of Books. It's a funny thing about mothers and fathers. Even when their own child is the most disgusting little blister you could ever imagine, they still think that he or she is wonderful. Some parents go further. They become so blinded by their adoration, they manage to convince themselves their child has qualities of a genius. Well, there is nothing very wrong with all this. It's the way of the world. It's only when parents begin telling us about the brilliance of their own revolting offspring that we start shouting, "Bring us a basin, we're going to be sick." Occasionally, one comes across parents who take the opposite line, who show no interest at all in their children, and these, of course, are far worse than the doting ones. Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood were two such parents. They had a son called Michael and a daughter called Matilda, and the parents looked upon Matilda in particular as nothing more than a scab. Matilda's brother Michael was perfectly normal boy, but the sister, as I said, was something to make your eyes pop. By the age of 1.5, her speech was perfect, and she knew as many words as most grown-ups. The parents, instead of applauding her, called her a noisy chatterbox and told her sharply that small girls should be seen and not heard. By the time she was 3, Matilda had taught herself to read by studying newspapers and magazines that lay around the house. At the age of 4, she could read fast and well, and she naturally began hankering after books. The only book in the whole of this enlightened household was something called Easy Cooking, belonging to her mother. And when she had read this from cover to cover and had learnt all of the recipes by heart, she decided she wanted something more interesting. "Daddy," she said, "do you think you could buy me a book?" "A book?" he said. "What do you want a flaming book for?" "To read, Daddy." "What's wrong with the telly, for heaven's sake? We've got a lovely telly with a 12-inch screen, and now you're coming to me asking for a book? You're getting spoiled, my little girl." Nearly every weekday afternoon, Matilda was left alone in the house. Her brother went to school, her father went to work, and her mother went out playing bingo. Mrs. Wormwood was hooked on bingo and played it 5 afternoons a week. On the afternoon of the day when her father had refused to buy her a book, Matilda set out all by herself to walk to the public library in the village. When she arrived, she introduced herself to the librarian, Mrs. Phelps. She asked if she might sit a while and read a book. Mrs. Phelps, slightly taken aback by the arrival of such a tiny girl unaccompanied by a parent, nevertheless told her that she was very welcome. "Where are the children's books, please?" Matilda asked. "They're over there, those on the lower shelves," Mrs. Phelps told her. "Would you like me to help you find a nice one with lots of pictures in it?" "No, thank you," Matilda said. "I'm sure I can manage." From then on, every afternoon, as soon as her mother had left for bingo, Matilda would toddle down to the library. The walk only took 10 minutes, and this allowed her 2 glorious hours sitting quietly by herself, reading in a cosy corner, devouring one book after another. When she had read every single children's book in the place, she started wandering round in search of something else. Mrs. Phelps, who had been watching her with fascination for the past few weeks, got up from her chair and went over to her. "Can I help you, Matilda?" she asked. "I'm wondering what to read next," Matilda said. "I've finished all the children's books." "You mean you've read all of the pictures?" "Yes, but I've read all of the books as well." Mrs. Phelps looked down at Matilda from her great height, and Matilda looked right back up at her. "I thought some were very poor," Matilda said, "but others were lovely. I liked The Secret Garden best of all. It was full of mystery. The mystery of the room behind the closed door, and the mystery of the garden behind the big wall." Mrs. Phelps was stunned. "Exactly how old are you, Matilda?" she asked. 4 years and 3 months, Matilda said. Mrs. Phelps was more stunned than ever, but she had the sense not to show it. "What sort of book would you like to read next?" she asked. Matilda said, "I would really like a good one that grown-ups read, a famous one." I don't know any names." Mrs. Phelps looked along the shelves, taking her time. She didn't quite know what to bring out. How, she asked herself, does one choose a famous grown-up's book for a 4-year-old girl? Her first thought was to pick a young teenager's romance of kind that is written for 15-year-old schoolgirls, but for some reason she found herself instinctively walking past that particular shelf. "Try this," she said. "It's very famous and very good. If it's too long for you, just let me know and I'll find something shorter and a bit easier." Great Expectations, Matilda read, by Charles Dickens. "I'd love to try it." "I must be mad," Mrs. Phelps told herself. But to Matilda, she said, "Of course you can try it." Over the next few afternoons, Mrs. Phelps could hardly take her eyes from the small girl sitting for an hour after hour in the big armchair at the far end of the room with the book on her lap. It was necessary to rest it on her lap because it was far too heavy for her to hold up, which meant she had to sit leaning forward in order to read. And a strange sight it was, this tiny dark-haired person sitting there with her feet nowhere near touching the floor, totally absorbed in the wonderful adventures of Pip and old Miss Havisham and her cobwebbed house, and by the spell of magic that Dickens, the great storyteller, had woven with his words. The only movement from the reader was lifting of the hand every now and then to turn over a page, and Mrs. Phelps always felt sad when the time came for her to cross the floor and say, "It's 10 to 5, Matilda." Within a week, Matilda had finished Great Expectations, in which that edition contained 411 pages. "I loved it," she said to Mrs. Phelps. "Has Mr. Dickens written any others?" "A great number," said the astounded Mrs. Phelps. "Shall I help you choose another?" Over the next 6 months, under Mrs. Phelps' watchful and compassionate eye, Matilda read lots of books. It was a formidable list of books that she had now read, and Mrs. Phelps was filled with wonder and excitement, but it was probably a good thing that she didn't allow herself to be completely carried away by it all. Almost anyone else witnessing the achievements of this small child would have tempted to make a great fuss and shout the news all over the village, but not so Mrs. Phelps. She was someone who minded her own business. "Mrs. Hemingway says a lot of things I don't understand," Matilda said to her, "especially about men and women, but I loved it all the same. The way he tells it, I feel like I'm right there on the spot, watching it all happen." "A fine writer will always make you feel like that," Mrs. Phelps said. "And don't worry about the bits you can't understand. Sit back and allow the words to wash around you like music." I will. "Do you know," Mrs. Phelps said, "that public libraries allow you to borrow books and take them home?" "I didn't know that," said Matilda. "Could I do it?" "Of course," Mrs. Phelps said. "When you have chosen your book you want, bring it to me and I can make a note of it, and it's yours for 2 weeks. You can take more than one if you wish." From then on, Matilda would visit the library only once a week in order to take out her new books and return the old ones. Her own small bedroom now became her reading room, and there she would sit and read most afternoons, often with a mug of hot chocolate beside her. She was not quite tall enough to reach things around the kitchen, but she kept a small box in the outhouse and she brought it in and stood on in order to get whatever she wanted. Mostly it was hot chocolate. She made it by warming the milk in a saucepan on the stove before mixing it. Occasionally she made Bovril or Ovaltine. It was pleasant to take a hot drink up to her room and have it beside her as she sat in her silent room, reading in the empty house in the afternoons. The books transported her into a world, introduced her to amazing people, and all of these people lived exciting lives. She went on olden days sailing trips with Joseph Conrad. She went to Africa with Ernest Hemingway and to India with Rudyard Kipling. She travelled all over the world while sitting in the room in a little English village. So hopefully, hearing about all the amazing adventures that Matilda went on reading her books, you guys can do the same. Enjoy!